Hello, people, and welcome to another win and another review of said win. Today I'm with George, and we're just going to talk about this Leeds win. Apparently, we didn't deserve the win, but apparently, you can piss off. I can't lie. It's just, it is what it is, and you have to get these scrappy wins every now and again. So, how are you doing, buddy? It's going to be an interesting one. I mean, as you can probably tell, George is not looking 100%. So, let's see how this goes.
No, man, no, I'm good. I'm good. It's look, it was a good night last night, but we're back. I'm excited to talk about the game because I feel like we're not going to get very many of these in the season where we have to talk about kind of where we've struggled, and I do think this was the first time this season um, that across the 45 minutes we were just second best to everything really. And I'm excited to kind of talk about some of the reasons as to why. I think one thing I will say in hindsight, you kind of take a look back at it, a lot of the fatigue stuff makes a ton of sense. It was probably something we should have highlighted a little bit more in the preview. When I look back at the intensity of what we did, including the travel, I didn't realize that the trip to Norway, just of course being lonely Canada up here, but it's almost 9,000 kilometers. And so like when I started to think about it, and of course Mikel talked about it in his press match conference, but when I listened to him and I started to think, hold on a second. So we've done Liverpool Spurs back to back. It's now the fourth game in 10 days after having traveled almost 9,000 kilometers round trip without really a training session, maybe just a recovery session on the Saturday before going to Leeds, who are the highest pressing team in the middle of the park in the Premier League right now. If you look at their kind of metrics in terms of their midfield pressures, especially in the center zone, they are the highest there with their pressing numbers. So, I mean, it makes sense to be a little bit fatigued, in terms of
Yeah.
how the boys are going to respond and how they're going to play. I do think like it was a tale of two halves. I will say on the rewatch, a lot of really good stuff in the first half. I think people missed that just because of how the narrative went. It was really quite even in the first half, and I think we had the best chances, and we had some excellent, excellent play. Like there was some bits of one touch play that were phenomenal. Some of the best this season, in fact. There was a period of play in the 30th minute that we'll talk about that was just phenomenal. And but then of course things fell apart in the second half, and we're here to talk about them. But yeah, no, I'm just happy that we won ugly and we continued to won 27. Points out of a possible 30 is incredible. 9 out of 10 wins, our best start to a Premier League season, really, and also one of our best starts ever. I think it's something like 100 years it's been since we've had a better start. So uh, I think when you have a look at it in general, if you're going to be off on your day, you get the 3 points, and you do so by any means necessary. And we kind of ended up getting there over the line. So yeah, excited.
Yeah, I mean, we should really get into it, but before we do, just quickly say that this is going to be a game that I think we're not as bullish as we usually are on the channel. I think this is going to be a game where we're looking at it and thinking that we came up against a good team, and despite the lights going out and all the things that happened in the middle of the game, it was a very very frenetic and very chaotic game for me, and just I remember watching it, and I remember at the end of the game, I was jubilant. I don't know about you, mate, but I was just sort of like, I don't know how we got through that. We just managed to grit it out. And when you look at it on rewatch, you can then tell, okay, these are the kinds of mistakes we made. This is the kind of intensity that we brought and didn't bring at times. And there were periods where we were a bit more loose on the ball than I would have liked. There were periods where I think they were just tactically made some very very smart switches to try and mark out key players that basically allowed our more fluid right hand side, which we did say against Boda that it was kind of a preparation for exploiting their left hand side with our right hand side, and Marsh made a very excellent tactical decision to move Roca a bit more to the right and really kind of man mark Odegaard a bit more. And what they did very well was they pressed up against Thomas very very well with their two, and they kind of tried to force him to be um, a bit more hurried on the ball than he usually would like, and there were times where we were a bit out of it in terms of our build up, and we kind of just were hurried off the ball a bit more. So yeah, um, let's get into it though. I think we started very well. What did you make of the first? I mean, the actual start. Let's forget the first start. The actual start of the game and how we got out of the first 10 minutes.
Um, I I thought the first 10 minutes were fine. I thought really when you have a look at it, there were some worrying moments on the ball. I think, we can talk about the tactics, I guess, of the pressing structure and really what we've seen, but just initial thoughts was the craziness, I guess, of the lights. I think that's really probably where we have to start with, essentially, and what that effect maybe had. I had a feeling, actually, to be honest, it actually worked to our detriment having that start delayed like that, because I think when you have a game plan when you're going away from home and you want to quiet down the crowd as much as you can, when you've got a crowd that's already riled up from being pissed off after having to come in, potentially maybe not starting, it really raised the temperature at the very start of the game for me. So I think it actually kind of worked against us in a way. And
Mm,
especially when you had a look at our start, we actually started quite well. Like, we were doing very good in terms of our passing and build up. We were going around their press quite well. And so I felt like that initial start kind of hampered our ability to really set our game from the off. And it kind of went a little bit downhill from there. But, the first half was very, very good. And, I think we had a very good plan. One thing I will say is just generally, I felt that our fullbacks in general, both of them really struggled to influence their way on the match. I think Ben White from minute one was feeling the effects from the crowd. You could really tell that he was somebody that was suffering, but just with his touch and, I think just his relationship with the Leeds fans, they were giving him stick and he was struggling to really live up to that kind of occasion. And then I think Tomiyasu did struggle receiving in the left back position. Especially under pressure. He was a pressing trigger. The both fullbacks were, and we'll talk about the press and everything in general a little bit. But well, then we're kind of going to get into the tactics. But how about you, mate? Like, did you ever fear that we weren't going to get started? Like, just in general, in terms like what
like
was your initial?
I'll tell you my timeline, right? So the game started, and I'd actually made lunch. I was like, I'll put something in the oven for half time, and then get ready for have something at half time, just a quick meal. And then 2 minutes in, the refs call the game off. So um, it was just sort of like it was sort of frenetic. I kind of was thinking, are we actually going to get a game at one point? Like it was
Yeah,
very sort of like, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? What's happening? This is a bit weird. Like, because like the thing is, I don't know about you, but for me, when you get into like that first 5 minutes of a game, the adrenaline's kind of pumping. You kind of just want to just everything's kind of going, and you just want to get into the nitty gritty of the game.
yeah,
And like just to have all that build up and then just to crash and then to have to go through, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And um, then eventually it happening. The If it was like that for me, like I can only imagine what it was like for the players. Like they're warmed up, they're ready, they're raring to go, and then all of a sudden it goes from here to like back down and then back up again. I can't even imagine what it must have been like. I mean, the intensity, especially given that it's Leeds and they are one
mhm,
of the most intense teams in the league. If you're going to have that, and you're going to have to make it basically re-establish how you're going to battle that intensity after 4 games in 10 days, like it's good. And the break, it's just like, I don't blame the refs. I mean, it's not in their control, but
mhm.
like it was just like, come on, man, you gotta have a contingency for things like this.
Yeah, but, first, like,
Yeah,
we'll answer a couple of these questions before we get into the
yeah.
tactics of it all, because it didn't matter who you had in terms of dual monsters in the back. It wasn't a matter of lacking a profile, that's why we suddenly didn't play well. It was, far more a case of us dropping off our levels and our intensity, and when you're not able to meet your markers with that extra 4 or 5 seconds just from general fatigue, then you're not gonna be able to execute the plan regardless of you having dual monsters in the back four, and I do think that Saliba had a game of two halves as well. Like when you have a look at it, I think Aaron Ramsdale was our clear man of the match for me, closely followed by Gabriel. But just there was a lot of loose touches in the middle of the park. And, in terms of us sustaining pressure, it was a combination of just not being able to hold on to the ball. Jesus uncharacteristically loose in some central areas. We'll get into it to kind of show you guys. But, we weren't able to really get out because we couldn't put our foot on the ball. But more so, it wasn't just a case of us not being able to handle the press, but it was more a case of us not being able to really find progression in the middle of the park, because they were blocking off Thomas Partey with a really good kind of zonal press in terms of jumping on our fullbacks. And so normally a lot of teams have done this. Bournemouth, Scott Parker really did it really well. Blocking off the center isn't normally an issue for us, but what's vital is our fullbacks. Like, that's really what let us down really in this
Yeah.
game, is our fullbacks have been able to really escape pressure quite well, and we did show signs of it in the first half. But then after that, it doesn't really matter if you've got dual monsters in the back. If you can't keep a hold of the possession of the ball, then
Mhm.
really you're lacking that last part of sustaining pressure, which is not just transition control, but also technical security. So that's kind of the big thing for me. But what did you make of this point here, Kern?
Yeah, look, I'm not surprised, I'll be honest. I think that you have obviously the fatigue of the crazy schedule, which is one thing to take into account. But the other thing is when you're playing against a team that is as intense as Leeds, and you're having a team that's as focused on retrieving the ball in high or higher up the pitch, trying to keep you penned in, trying to restrict your build up, trying to make sure that you don't allow for basically your own overloads to create a situation where you can get out of the first phase of build up. If you're too risky, if you're trying to be that intense, you're trying to push and push and push and push, it's going to lead to mistakes. And I think that what Mikel was trying to say is, look, you don't have to be as focused on trying to be this high, like sort of high tempo, high intensity team from the off here. We need to make sure that we don't play into their hands and take too many risks. I think over verticality could have been a very, very big misstep if we were trying to play, if we're basically trying to play out the back and try to go too vertical, try to play through them too much, because through the center, as we mentioned in the preview, centrally they'd like to close off zones, and the only way you're going to do that is if Thomas kind of drops into that space in between their some call it a hexagon, whatever you want to call it.
Well,
If
the
you
big
don't have
thing is
that, so
yeah, well, I think the big thing is just being that first line of pressure, right? And so I
yeah,
think the big thing that he didn't want Arteta going on full intensity was really just a direct result of fatigue. He didn't want them gassing out early, and that's exactly what happened, right? Like
hmm
he knew that there
yeah,
was a minimal amount in the tank, and so what he was more so saying was, "Listen, we're operating at maybe half capacity in terms of a team right now. We need to pick our moments. We need to pick our moments when to be intense and really when to ramp up pressure. But let's try to kill the crowd." Because again, Ellen Road, they haven't lost at home yet, Leeds in the league, and that's a really important point. And so I think the initial idea was to quiet the crowd, kill the energy, which was being ramped up from having been stopped for almost 40 minutes and the threat of not having a game. And then the idea was to kind of pick your moments throughout the half where we could ramp up intensity and pick up the pressure and choose to pick
hmm
our moments specifically. But I think it's now time just to kind of, get generally into kind of what happened in the game. I think I agree a little bit with this. You want to see us hold on to the ball a little bit more, especially in these instances. But again, I'm going to assign it to fatigue, and I think it's really fair. I think you'll see in a lot of these screenshots that are coming up here in terms of how we apply pressure. We were able to get out a lot better than people felt. But I think a big thing was Leeds had an entire week to prepare for this. Again, they are the most intense team in the middle of the
hmm
park in terms of pressures, which I don't think people were giving them credit for prior. And again, they hadn't lost at Ellen Road. If you actually look at their press intensity, they have a similar defensive line to Chelsea as well as an intensity that's a little bit better. And so when you look at their kind of pressures per action, which is the PPDA, I mean, you compare it to their defensive line. They're one of the top teams in the league in terms of being able to sustain a high press, but also keep a high defensive line themselves. And look, it's their issues have been in central spaces, and we will definitely get into it because I think you'll see the spaces that they create from their high pressure. And if we had, I think, another week's rest and we didn't have players that were starting, in midweek, I really do think that we've got a little bit of a different story here. But Karen, maybe I'll go to you because generally we'll pop up some of the general statistics because I do think that if we had some key moments in the first half, we could have been 2 or 3 nil up. Um,
yeah.
we had taken some of our chances, but generally, I'll just have a quick view for everybody watching right now of kind of what the running XG was. And again, you can find this at O_that_crab on Twitter, who's great, kind of statistics expert from the Arsenal Vision podcast and also Ars blog. So follow him if you're looking for really quick statistics. But you can kind of see here, guys, with this running statistics that the first half is very, very even. And, the star obviously indicates the goal. But, we had slightly more possession. But, that first half was highly contested and wasn't what people felt like. The man of the match of that half was Martin Odegaard, who was really important in making sure that we built that first line of pressure. And he was very important in terms of us exploiting the spaces in the middle of the park. and something exactly kind of what we said in the preview that we would have to focus on. We'll talk about how we ended up doing that, but I think here at Kern, you can say really easily a game of two halves, and when you have a look at kind of the field tilt, it says that even more so, and so when you had a look, obviously first early 10-15 minutes, like you were mentioning, Curran, like a little bit of pressure, Leeds put us on, but then we dominated the match in the first half, and
Mhm.
make no mistake about it, like we held the greater territory in the first half, and then of course by the second half it was all Leeds. There really wasn't a response from us, and it was the first time I think this season that we've really had this kind of effect. But what did you make kind of this stark 45 minutes? And do you agree with me that it was just fatigue? Like I'm looking at things in the second half, and we're just not doing the basics, like the very basics of football. Forgetting our structure, forgetting some of the very basics about pressing, but we're not doing some of the things that we know this team can do. And so I just felt like fatigue was just such a big part of the story of this game. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, fatigue is one thing. I think what Leeds did very well is they exploited the wide spaces in terms of our fullbacks quite well. They were able to retrieve the ball, and I think Jesse Marsh was very key. And by the way, this was a game that both managers were very complimentary of each other, and both managers respected each other a lot, and that you could tell that they were both trying to
Mm,
counteract what the other was doing. Um, Look, Marsh definitely saw that we were struggling wide with our fullbacks getting through the zones, and he indicated to his winger and the ball side CM, side it was, look, you have to get on them. If you can get on them, we can get the ball back, and that's what they did in that second half. And that was the key motion for me in how we were losing control, because out wide we weren't having the security to get it to a Xhaka or an Odegaard, who, especially Odegaard, marked out of the game by Roca a lot. Um, an inability to play through the lines that were able to allow Leeds to basically turn over the ball, keep that fill tilt in our half a lot of the time, and yeah, a very very interesting game um,
well,
where where the weaknesses were with us. I think you wouldn't expect a Tomiyasu to be um, receiving the ball and not being able to get it out of his feet. That's not something that we usually attribute to him. And I think that him playing on the left back experiment has to kind of be kind of done with now. I think this needs to be a case where we bring Kieran back in, or Zinchenko when he's ready.
Well, I think there's a couple things like we talked about. The fullbacks were the biggest issue in terms of us being able to get out there. I'm just going to address this comment. I don't agree with this really. And, I had a big thread today on the differences between Arteta and Pep. And, like, look, in terms of philosophy, Arteta and Pep are very different. There's a core value difference in terms of how they approach athletic aggression, and they compare it to kind of control with possession. I mean, I would agree that Pep is much more of a Puritan who looks to control games and through possession of the ball. But, Mikel isn't that. He does prioritize off the ball structure, and he does prioritize the press. In fact, you can see it with our metrics this season. We are one of the most improved in terms of the defensive line, as well as one of the most improved man to man presses this year. And so I think when you're analyzing the key differences in this evolution, it's really clear that Mikel focuses a lot more on man to man marking generally. And that's kind of seen with his increased PPDA. But, the press has become a chance creation tool for Mikel basically all season. We didn't employ it well this season, and I think that, or this game, sorry, but and that's really because it was fatigue, and people were short to the distances. I think both fullbacks struggled to exit properly again. I think Tommy Asa was very much at fault in terms of being far too static, and we'll talk about how Martinelli was left very isolated, and so we ended up
Hmm.
having two or three man on Martinelli very consistently, and we weren't able to switch. And so typically when we build through the left, Jesse Marsh was really strong in making sure to stop entry into our fullbacks. Once they got possession in wide areas, that was the pressing trigger to jump. And so I think instead of talking in theories, we should probably get into some of the
Yeah.
tactics so that we can show everybody, because then everybody can see kind of what happened. Because in reality, for us at least, really what we lacked is the intensity to meet our marker, especially wide. That's been a case of Ben White all season. He's been phenomenal in that area. He wasn't doing that. In terms of our left back, our defensive intensity, we've had Granit Xhaka a lot higher up the pitch. Granit Xhaka dropped deeper a lot of times because we were struggling to build out. So we weren't playing our game. And I just think everybody was a step slower in terms of responding to what the rotations can be. But let's get into it in terms of what we did and what went wrong. So very first off top, Leeds started off in a very basic 4-4-2, right? Like that's how their starting metric really goes. And they have Rodrigo and Jack Harrison kind of in the center of the park here. But what Leeds went and transitioned to really, really well is they let our back line have possession of the ball, and there was really lack of pressure. And it wasn't until you kind of get this in terms of the press. And so I'll put everybody's attention kind of to that front four where Sinistera and Aronson, who were their wingers, really um, propped up and put a lot of pressure on our fullbacks. And so if Saliba ever had the ball, which is, kind of what this shows here, they had this kind of 4-2-4 structure, really. And you can see the space in the middle of the park is by Roca and Adams in the center of the pitch. And if you're able to play around or through this front four, then you would be able to get into leads, and that's how basically you would able to attack kind of the fullback and the center back channels, which is what we did for the goal, ironically. But Sinistera was 1v1 with Ben White, and of course Aronson was 1v1 versus Tommy Asu, and they kind of let us have possession of the ball, and I left kind of Harrison and Rodrigo here because they kind of just guided pressure towards the fullback, and as soon as Saliba passed the ball to White, Sinistera was quick and onto him. And the idea is we needed quick balls inside in the middle of the park for Odegaard, and that or Granit Xhaka if you were on the left hand side. And this was the idea of what we tried to do, because if you were able to do that, you can see that there's a big mismatch in the middle of the park, a 3v2 versus their pivot. And this was the gamble that Leeds basically did. So if you were brave enough and had the technical security in your back line to really play through this, there's going to be a lot of space for you to exploit. And particularly Mark Roca, who had a very slow kind of start meeting people wide. Martin Odegaard had a great game in that half. Again, I said man of the match for me. And, it was because that matchup against Roca and him, you can see here, it's a mismatch really, because while both aren't supremely, yeah, I would assume like pace and power merchants really. Martin Odegaard had a really good ability to kind of drift wide and help Ben White, who was struggling with that entry pass. And Gabby Jesus, who's up top right now, but there was a lot of times he dropped central to really help out because he could see that we were struggling to break out. But this is kind of the initial pressing structure of the first half that kind of Leeds employed. And we'll talk kind of in the second half how that slightly changed. But really, they had Rodrigo and Harrison not really hurrying people very quick, but just guiding balls out to the fullbacks. And that's when they jumped. And we struggled to build out. I think in response, what the team did or attempted to do really was kind of to build in a 3-2, what we've seen typically with our, Tommy Asu dropping into the middle of the park, and Onus kind of held on Gabriel to kind of break lines through the middle of the park here, which is something that he did very well basically all game. Gabriel had a very good game, kind of just second behind Ramsdale in my estimation for man of the matches, by the way. But what ended up happening is when Tommy Asu kind of dropped inside, Aronson was doing a really good job in terms of covering for him, but Tommy was really quite stiff in his angles and receiving in the middle of the park. And so what happened was he wasn't able to really receive in the back line there. And so what happened is Xhaka had to drop deep, and this is what left the left hand side seriously static. And so when you kind of got this quite a bit of times, if Granit Xhaka ever got the ball and he would release it to Martinelli, what you can see here is Martinelli was constantly against 2 or 3 players. And so a big thing is when you look at this, the left-hand side wasn't able to build properly. Martinelli ended up getting isolated quite a bit. I mean, you had this situation developed quite a lot, and we ended up losing the ball. So this for me was kind of the story of the first half and really where we struggled. But I'll give you a chance, Curran, to kind of dissect the press and stuff here. So what were your thoughts kind of on how we struggled to really get out of this?
I mean, we've talked about in the past about how the left side of our build up is a lot less mobile with Tomiyasu at left back before, and we've talked about how sometimes Zinchenko has brought a different level of technical security to that left side that has allowed players like Martinelli and Xhaka to get a bit further up and get into zones that they're more comfortable in. I think the whole game we were quite static on that left side. I think the rotations just aren't clicking right now. It was like, you remember at the beginning of the season where where a lot of people were complaining about the right hand side, and it wasn't really mobile enough. It wasn't really working. The same is going on with our left hand side now. It's sort of a bit more. I think Marcelli is becoming a bit more isolated at times, and obviously this is going to be due to a lack of familiarity in certain roles for Tomiyasu, I think, who's more comfortable being a bit more inside and receiving, and then quickly popping it off into midfield rather than advancing to form the quote unquote pivot in midfield. I don't think that's his zone. I think he's more preferable to be a that in that three, to be either on the right or the left if he is on the left, to be a the quote unquote inverted fullback or the third man in a on the side, on the left hand side of build up, instead of being sort of in the two, which was what we were saying with Tierney at the Bodo game.
Mhm.
The 3-2 where you have Tierney and or Tomiyasu in the two. They're not really used to that. They're used to being in that 2-3, being a bit more wider, establishing the the build up in terms of making it so that you have Xhaka inside and bringing it into Xhaka, who can then uh, progress the ball a bit further. um, I think they're adjusting to that 3-2 a bit, and I think that it's a bit sort of like, I don't really know what the point is. I think we've established this 2-3 quite well, and at times it's looked very, very nice, and at other times it looks a bit clunky with either side. So it'll be interesting to see how he moves on from this. Um, I think in terms of this specific game, if you look at their press is like, if you look on this picture here, you can see the spaces. You can see, for example, that Martinelli and Xhaka should technically have an overload on that side.
Well,
Uh,
what the thing was, Kern, like, and we'll talk about it because we did it beautifully. In the 30th minute, we broke out exactly how you need to break out, where your
mhm.
fullbacks have quick entry passes into Odegaard and Saka. And I've highlighted them in this picture because this is the break ball. This is what we really needed to do, where we needed almost a wall pass between, if you're on the left, a Tomiyasu entry into the middle, who would pass it back to Thomas Partey and break centrally. We saw that many, many times actually in the first half, and especially in the 30th minute, where for me, we had some of our best bits of play, and we'll get into it. But really, on the right here, Ben White wasn't able to kind of facilitate that entry pass. Sometimes we would use Bukayo Saka, who would
It's
come
the
deep.
pressure, mate. It's
Um,
the pressure.
it's the pressure because they would press us wide, but we needed to get it inside because that was where the space was. The middle of the park is the space. It's a 3v2, and really the first entry pass into either Martin Odegaard or Granit Xhaka was really something that we needed to do. And then once we broke out and they were able to kind of pass it to Thomas Partey, that's when Thomas Partey could really open up the pitch kind of in the middle of the park. And so when you look at it, right now we didn't really see this. And so part of the issue was, once we got into this position in terms of the 3-2, Leeds were really did well to kind of block that entry pass. And so what Granit Xhaka had to do was, and in response to this, because we weren't able to get out, Granit Xhaka had to drop deep. And that's when it breaks the structure down a little bit, because then if you look at the back line there, it's essentially 6 versus 4. And that's when we end up having kind of a mismatch numerically. And that's kind of the big reason that we struggled in that first half. And it did end up leaving Martinelli quite isolated in terms of what positions he was picking up. And, you can even see in kind of this position here, Martinelli is constantly having to beat two or three people because right now he's left alone because Granit has helped in the build-up quite a bit, but it leaves us short up front. And so what we needed to do is to make sure that our fullbacks were receiving quick and able to kind of fire passes in the midfield. But when they can't, Granit did what he should have done to try to help and try to drop deep. But what it did do, it kind of helped. It helped Leeds kind of keep us pinned into their half. And so that was the big issues that we felt, kind of tactically. And in general, one thing that we really did see kind of from this performance was an employment of the offside trap. So I don't know if people were catching this, but we had an incredibly high line, but more so, not just our defensive line height, but really in terms of what we were able to do to try to stop Leeds from pressing us so high. One of the big tactics was to make sure that we were catching them in quite a bit of offside traps. And we actually found this not just in kind of the first half, but also we saw this quite a bit for even their penalty shouts. And we'll get into it because there was a clear offside, but this back line is learning quite a bit to play offside traps, and it's becoming a mechanism to really pin teams in as much as we can. So it's something to really keep in track of. And you guys are saying, if it's down to fatigue, we need reinforcements in January. I mean, look, we'll look at January and we'll try to attack it a little bit more in terms of what we can do and what are the opportunities there. But one thing I will say once again, it was the fourth game in 10 days. The turnaround of 9,000 kilometers traveling is something that you're going to struggle with Leeds, who are one of the highest midfield pressures away from home. Like if this is something that you end up seeing for 3 or 4 games, I can understand some of the sentiments, but really it seems like a little bit more of an outlier, especially when you have a look at what Arsenal were doing just in general, because we were breaking through them. And speaking of which, we should probably get into the first bit where we really did well, which was this great one-touch play. So this was in the 30th minute. Um, Arsenal where they were able to break out really successfully. So here you can kind of see Rodrigo is a little slow in terms of his forward up there. He really should be on Thomas Partey, and I think if he does this and he's a little bit deeper, we don't quite see this. But again, they lead switch off a little bit, and Saliba, who in the first half had a game of two halves, he was incredible in the first half actually, especially receiving the ball here, and he was very very brave. Aaron Ramsdale was also, somebody was very calm with clip balls out to the fullbacks. He was doing really, really well there, not just his shot stopping. But, William Saliba starts off this move, which is absolutely brilliant. And this is what we needed to do. So, William Saliba starts in the back. He then fires off a ball off to Ben White, who then fires a pass into Bukayo Saka, and we intricately play the ball inside where Jesus is dropping deep. And I just wanted to highlight everybody here. Look at Jesus in terms of how deep he is. This is the one time when Jesus was dropping, he was actually able to be secure with the ball and offer an out ball. And then once you get the ball into Thomas Partey, this is what you wanted to see. And so that entry pass in the midfield, we were able to really break their lines. And then Thomas Partey does brilliantly to fire off the ball to Shaka, who has a one-touch layoff to Jesus, who is breaking off. And then Jesus peels, and you're in this position. Now, the play breaks down because, of course, there's a foul on Jesus who fires it off to Martinelli. But here I wanted to highlight, I think Jesus makes the wrong decision. For me, he should be passing to Bukayo Saka at this point. He's a lot freer. It's something that I think, he should have done. But I'm not going to criticize him too much because he does excellently in here to drop so deep but get so high up the pitch. This is something, if you're looking at what's different between kind of Arsenal of old and this season, this is what Lacazette was not able to give us. And so when you have a look at it, this for me is kind of the best play in the first half, and this is what we needed to do, kind of the entirety of the first half. Because when you have a look again, we'll go back to that press. It really starts with here. So when you have Saliba with the ball here, just like in this photo here, they fired off to Ben White, who fires it off to Saka, and Saka has a one-touch layoff into the center of the park with Jesus dropping deep. And once Thomas Partey picks it up in the middle of the park, he's able to fire the balls through the middle of Leeds' press, and that's what that breaks down. And you know what? If we had a little bit more, I think, energy in being able to do that, because we have been so secure technically in the build-up, kind of all season. I think we see this a little bit more. But Curran, what did you make of that kind of one bit of play? Because for me, it was probably one of the best bits of play that we've seen all season, ironically, just in a game that we were probably second best for so long. That was one of the best bits of play I've seen Arsenal produce this season. So, what did you make of that bit? Okay, 1 second. So, um,
Yeah, I mean,
essentially,
it was interesting in terms of how we got the ball out. I think the connection between.
I think we got Curran that's transforming.
Am I going crazy? Yeah, I'm going crazy.
So essentially, when we do break out though of this pass, I think one of the big parts that we struggle to do consistently is I think Martin Odegaard made a lot of really good decisions in the middle of the park, and we needed to isolate Mark Roca. Mark Roca was a 1v1 battle that we could have won, and we needed to isolate a little bit more. I think if we were able to build up quickly on the left a little bit, we could have fired balls into Martin to be a little bit higher up the pitch. And I think this really stopped us from being able to exploit that Liam Cooper and strike channel. And we'll talk about the goal really, really quickly and soon, actually, because that follows right after that great bit of one touch play. But that Liam Cooper and strike channel was something that we really needed to exploit a lot more of. I think what we struggled with Shaka being so deep in this game because we were struggling to build up a little bit. What happened is that you weren't able to kind of influence Martinelli into the game to really push up higher up the pitch and to get Jesus kind of in the front foot here in between the center backs. We found Jesus dropping far too much. And so you ended up having Saka as well as Martinelli really isolated. What I did like in this game is that Bukayo Saka seemed to be finishing off moves quite a bit as opposed to really dropping deep. And I think that's because Martin Odegaard did such a good job in the first half of being able to be that person to really orchestrate play and being able to drop into the middle of the park and provide an option because there were very few people that were technically secure in that half. And so Martin Odegaard was doing really, really well in that right half space to make sure he was available, but also to turn play and to really fire off to the opposite marker. And he did find Granit Xhaka on occasions, which is when we broke out really, really well. Um, so let's try it
Right.
again. Current, like, what
Am
did
I
you
here?
make? Kind of, yeah, you're here.
Thank God. I don't know what happened. Everything just went kind of crazy for a second. But yeah, um, in terms of the Odegaard through ball, in terms of getting it connecting with Partey, I think that was the first one. With the Jesus chance, I think there's a couple of things to outline there. Obviously, the Saliba. If you go back to the Saliba one, if you look at the the positioning of our press, you can see that this we've actually got our normal 2-3 or 3-2, whatever you want to go, with Tomiyasu out wide, with Thomas and essentially in wide, and it kind of, if you look at the actual way they pressed in this situation, it's a different scenario. They're not their forwards are split, and there's an ability to get the ball through the lines. And Saliba does very well to break that first challenge and get the ball into midfield. And from there, you can start to progress the ball. From there, you can start to go to Odegaard, and where Odegaard comes in, he looks like he's basically he's in space, and he then gets the ball to Partey back when he's hounded, and then from there you can get the runners off. Obviously, the Jesus being deep, I mean he's kind of blurred there, but he's running. He's making that run, and this is what the difference is, as you mentioned before I went crazy. The movement from Jesus to come deep and then move into the box. We always praise Lacazette for coming deep and providing that overload, making sure we can get that overload in the middle third, but he couldn't make those runs into the box. He couldn't make those runs. He wasn't mobile enough. Whereas Jesus here, he is mobile enough and he gets the ball back. And I agree with you. Look, in real time, I was more focused on the Martinelli sort of, the Martinelli being released and like we should have got through, but I didn't see it on rewatch. I saw it like you did. You release Saka here, and that's 1-0. Look, it's simple, but and in hindsight, you can look back and say, why didn't you do that? That's so simple. But in real time, like even I didn't see it. Like I was more focused on the ball being recycled to Martinelli, and the ball advantage should have been played. I'll be honest, but it is what it is, and we eventually got the goal. But in this scenario, you've got to have the awareness to find the open man. I remember away to Brighton last year, there was a scenario where Emil could have just squared it to I think it was to Pepe at the time, and you just don't have. You're looking your vision is just sort of kind of like focused on goal at some points, and you just don't have that awareness because you're just sort of like, okay, I can go and do something here. And this is a similar scenario, except I think this one is more obvious, where Saka is obviously open and he just doesn't see him. But
Yeah.
yeah,
No, absolutely. And look, at the end of the day, like I don't think people really focused on this because in terms of our goal, I'll describe a little bit here. But look, we hurry and harass Leeds, and Brendan Aronson does a huge hospital pass, or sorry, not Aronson, Rodrigo does a massive hospital pass. Once he receives kind of in that left half space, he does this stupid left-footed cross to his left back, and you basically get this position because it breaks down. And Bukayo Saka just pressures Stroik, which is, it's not Pascal's fault because he should never be receiving the ball in such a way, but it's a clear hospital pass. And you kind of right after that bit of really good play by Arsenal. And then basically what you get is after pressuring, Martin Odegaard picks up the second ball and you're in this position. And then when you're in this position, by the way, this is what we highlighted in the preview, by the way. So the narcissistic pat on the back, the
hmm
Stroik Cooper channel, I knew that it was going to be exploited. I don't think we did it enough. But really, when we had a look at it, this is the kind of position that we really, really needed. And I agree. Like that was just a hospital. I don't know why he did that, but that was definitely
there was no need. Like I kind of like if you're going to make a switch, like this, like passing without sort of intention and passing just to say for the sake of passing is a big pet peeve of mine. I don't know about you, mate, but for
yeah,
me, if you're not passing with a reason, either to escape pressure or to find an open man, if you're just passing just to pass it, it's annoying. Like if I was a Leeds fan, I would have been just super annoyed because what is the point of that? There's no point apart from just having a little a strike of the ball just to make yourself feel better. I just felt that there was no intention behind it. There was no aggression or sort of like something that you can produce from that sort of situation. It just felt like it was just sort of there. You just sort of hung it up just to hang it up.
Yeah, and you know what? Look, when you're in this position, this goal is all Martin Odegaard because I talk a lot on this channel about what kind of message do you send with your pass, and this is something that Martin Odegaard I think can do more of because he can do it when he's in this position and he's able to be vertical instead of going into the center of the park, instead of ignoring the Granit Xhaka call, who by the way has his hands up. I
Yeah,
think he does a phenomenal job here, and look, Bukayo Saka makes an excellent out to in run. There's no chance that Strike or Cooper are going there, but this is all on Martin Odegaard's pace of pass and basically asking Saka to take a shot. He tells Bukayo Saka what to do with the pace of pass because it's excellent. And from this position, Bukayo finishes weak foot, and it's an excellent bit of play. But one thing, as a coaching wise, by the way, I just wanted to kind of highlight for people is when kind of Bukayo Saka receives the ball in that area, there's only two ways and finishes that he can do. And ironically, Mikel has mentioned this in the past, but just some coaching nuggets for people. People kind of were criticizing. I didn't know that he had this type of finish. Bukayo Saka has always had excellent ball striking technique. Weak foot or strong foot, I've maintained on this channel. He has it. He doesn't do it consistently, but he has excellent power. He has a short back lift, and we see it in this finish. When you're so wide, essentially at this point, there's only two finishes that you can do. You can either go high near post or cross the face of goal. Now, why can you go higher near post? Because when you're so wide at that angle, a goalkeeper's natural positions is to put his hands to his side, right? And so when you go high, you have to basically make the action to put his hand up. And that's where the space is if you're going to go near post. You should never go on the floor if you're near post on a wide angle. Never. So that's the first thing. And he does it excellently. Even if it's on his weak foot, he chooses to go high. Now, another option, obviously, is to go across the face of goal. There's more space there as a coach to finish. But also one thing to keep in mind of if there is a parry or a rebound, if the goalkeeper is able to get to it, it rebounds into the mixer and into the area. So that's why when you're wide at that point, there's two basic finishes that you've got to do, which is the high rooftop finish, which is what Bukayo Saka has done. And this isn't the first time he's done it too. I remember a time a couple seasons ago where he did it, I believe, against Watford, but it was more on the left, and he fires high. But it was also near post finish, similarly to this. But Bukayo Saka, excellent. This is now what his 8 goal and assists in his last 7 games, and I think the last four, all of these contributions have been from positions where we were behind to tie or to win. So he's becoming extremely clinical in terms of pulling us out of the edge. But again, I do want to basically give onus to Martin Odegaard here because for me, this is what I know he can produce. He doesn't produce it enough, but when he does do this, it's incredible. And for me, he makes the pass, he makes the goal, and I think the plaudits need to go to him because it basically capped off the man of the match from an Arsenal perspective on the first half. But Current, what about you? What did you make the goal?
no, I'm just gonna reiterate on the strike point before I get into Odegaard because look, when you're near post, I mean you're near post, and the goalkeeper's obviously going to be near post. Um, if you go near post, the goalie is just going to save it, put out for a corner. If you go far post, or you hit the side netting, either way, because you're trying to be too accurate with it. If you go far post, you at least get the chance for a rebound. I think there was a video going around about Mikel coaching Jeremy Lynch on the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, if you go far post, you got the ability for the keeper to get a hand to it and then go for an easy rebound for your number 9 or whoever's in the box. If you go in the roof, obviously you're putting it. If you lash it with enough power, you're at least getting it through either through the keeper's hands or quick enough that the keeper can't react in time. And Bukayo does the perfect thing. He just rifles it. He rifles it weak foot, by the way. That's how it was on his right foot. He rifles it into the top of the net. I think it's an excellent finish from him, and he's done very well to get it in a position where from that angle you wouldn't exactly consider him favorite to get the goal there. So yeah, perfect. But this is the thing about Martin. I think Martin, I posted earlier, his new role in terms of being this sort of um, build-up contributor, getting it through the lines, trying to basically get it to either to get it through to right to left switches, or to continue it down to Bukayo, or even get it into Jesus, and basically with his off the ball movement in where he likes to underlap and get into the box and try and make these third man runs. He's doing very well at it, but this is what we bought him for. We bought him to be that final ball um, aggressive passer that we all know he can be. And this is why I think Fabio's been brought in, because Fabio does that with excessive ability. He has this ability to be aggressive with his passing, to do the final ball actions. He's a ball striker. Odegaard is performing well in this new role, but I think this is the role that we need to see him more in. I've said multiple times on Twitter and multiple times on this podcast that Martin Odegaard is one of the most talented players we have at the club in terms of his technical security, his ability to find passes, his ability to get the ball into situations where we can profit from. But the question is, will he be aggressive enough? Will he do these kinds of passes where he's basically, as you mentioned, as you said, inviting players to shoot. He's inviting players to tell them, look, this is on a plate for you. The weight of the pass is perfect. The positioning of the pass is perfect. He's taken advantage of basically splitting the two defenders, and he's done it very, very well. And this is the major thing that we want from him. We want him to be able to be that creator. And for me, the one thing that I'm not saying this. I don't like the guy. I think he's a very, very good player. But to have our main creator in the team, as it being called, to be the one producing the least amount of shot creating actions in the team, in the top five, in our front five, I just don't know what we're doing here. I think we need to see more of this kind of thing from him.
Well, I think we know that he can do it, and for me, this is one of his better passes of the season because he
Yeah.
does everything that I want. It's a quick release, he's vertical, and he's concise. You know, he's able to kind of release that pass quickly, and it's what leads to the goal. So
The
for me,
weight is perfect as well. The weight of it is I think it's got to be emphasized as well, because
I think
it
I'll be
allows
honest
him
with
to
you.
take it into his stride perfectly.
I'll be honest with you, Bukayo Saka doesn't like that because he doesn't want to finish weak foot. I think he
I
overhits
know.
it. I think he overhits it. He does just want that slid ball so he can curl it on his left. But one thing
Mhm.
that you do with that pace of pass is you tell him finish or cross. And that's what I like to see. What I don't like is kind of these dinky slip balls that basically leave it up to the attacker to decide. I really like when you're a playmaker in the final third or whatever you want. Like I like when your passer tells you what to do without you knowing. So when Thomas Partey receives the ball, he fires it off really quick into Granit Xhaka. It tells him you don't have time. Okay, like when you play a ball quick like that, it means I need you to hurry up your action, play the ball quick,
It's a
or you're
tempo
gonna have
raiser.
a yeah, it's a gas peddler. I don't think we have enough of them. I think we miss Emil Smith Rowe, who does it a little bit more through dribbling as opposed to passing. But again, I do find that Martin Odegaard's the same thing. Like he's typically too afraid to kind of release the ball quickly. He's too afraid in contact at times, but also he's not vertical enough. But this was just incredible, and so I think
I mean,
again,
we've said it, the extra touch at times, the extra touch, the extra kind of he takes when you need one touch, sometimes he takes three. And while it looks nice and while it's aesthetically good, does it serve the purpose
I
of what it
mean,
needs to be doing?
look, I because I want to end it. We have to get into the second half, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna say like the big thing was for me. I've talked about Martin Odegaard and his instinct to recycle. I've talked about it on this channel for so long, and you know it is a personality trait. These are things about players. Look at Sambi Lukonga, for example. Is his instinct to run back to goal? No. Like, will you change that? I don't think you will. And so when you talk about players, I really think that there's some things that are coachable and there's other things that are instinct plays that you do have to really understand. But when he's doing these positions, and again, I just want to put it up again because it's brilliant play. And you know, he should be showed this multiple times and say, look, Martin, when you're vertical and when you do things, the team wins. When you do these things, the team scores goals. So please, when you're in this position in that kind of half space, make sure that you're looking up and you're not looking to recycle the ball back. Make sure that you're playing forward. Be brave. I don't care that your passing accuracy is 89, 90% in this area. Make sure that you're doing really, really good things to progress this team because when you're in this position, we don't want to go back. We want to go forward. So he does
No.
it really, really well. And then we basically get into the second half.
Mhm.
Um, and this is the change. So I guess for me, Rodrigo pissed Jesse Marsh off with that pass. It's very, very clear. But guys, this is the kind of the switch that Leeds ended up doing, and it wasn't anything massive, but they still kept the same 4-2-4, but they brought Aronson inside, and they basically shunted Jack Harrison out wide, and they had Bamford come in the middle of the park. Now, what this did is it did give Leeds a little bit more ability on the ball, and I think this from us is just a breakdown physically. And we'll talk a little bit about the chances and maybe the pen decisions because I think tactically for me, it was very difficult to analyze this because people just weren't running, and it basically became a defending show of Gabrielle and Aaron Ramsdale holding us together. And while we just couldn't string anything on the ball, Martin Odegaard got subbed super early because he was gassed out, he wasn't able to move, and I think while having an amazing first half, in the second half he was just completely non-existent, and that's why Mikel subbed him. By the way, because he was really poor. In the
No.
second. But when you had this change for you, Curran, because it started off really quick, like they almost scored in the first kick of the second half with
Mhm.
a really quick ball from Mark Roca, and then it's a clear handball by Patrick Bamford. I hate him so much. Like he. By the way, Patrick Bamford deserves some serious criticism because it wasn't just the handball off the start of the second half. Even for the penalty and the kick out, supposedly he dives. It reminded me of Ruud van Nistelrooy. I was just having flashbacks and like the amount of anger I had with Martin Keown with that. It just pissed me off because he didn't touch him. And Patrick Bamford dives. For me, he deserves a yellow card. Like if you're gonna pull it back like that and you're gonna talk that it's simulation, he really needed to do it. So but look, what did you make of kind of this quick Leeds change? Because it was really the only tactical change that I saw from Jesse Marsh's side. And I don't think that he changed what they wanted to do. He just added somebody better in Patrick Bamford, who was able to drop a little bit deep and break out if we did have possession of the ball. But I just think bringing Aronson inside meant that they had a little bit more of a creative threat. And I do like Jack Harrison personally more out wide, where he's able to make out to in runs a little bit more. And I just think it had a little bit of a better balance because you had your two ball playing players close to each other who could combine, and then they could release the players that were big space players like Sinistera and Harrison, who were able to receive wide and dribble in big spaces. But what did you make of this kind of Leeds change in the second half?
No, I think this is where it becomes obvious where our fullbacks kind of struggled because it looked like whenever we got the ball out of a Gabriel or a Saliba's feet, they were isolating a White and Tomiyasu up a lot and basically just trying to press on them and get the ball back and try to fire it into wide areas. You could see by their disallowed goal, which, by the way, I didn't even take. We could have done screenshots for it, but it was ridiculous. I'm not even going to justify that with screenshots. It was a stupid decision from Bamford. I don't know what he was thinking in terms of trying to scam that goal from that cross. He pushes Gabriel. It's very simple. And then pretends that he's
Oh,
not
I
done
think you're
anything.
talking about a little bit later. I'm talking about like the very first bit.
No, I'm
Uh,
talking about the because the thing is, no, but he does handball it, but there's also a push on him. There's a push on Gabriel, and then because Gabriel kind of falls over, and then he just
yeah.
taps it in from 6 yards. But obviously, the way the major incident was the handball in the build up to that in the build up to that sequence. But if you look at the actual replay of it, you can see that even like Gabriel falls, and Gabriel's not like a dainty little man. He
Mm.
gets a push in the back, and Bamford just takes it and puts it in the back of the net. Look, in terms of that incident, it's not even worth discussing. Like I know a lot of Leeds fans are up in arms about it. I don't really care.
Well,
It's
it's
a
a
quite
handball.
clear
It's
push on it.
simple. I think you close the book by saying it's a handball. It's a
Yeah.
foul on Gabriel, and he does it later on in the half. I mean,
Yep.
Gabriel and Bamford had a big battle in the game, and I just think that Bamford was looking to isolate Gabriel. He knew that he was emotional. He was trying to get him to get a kick out. He was trying to rile him up, and he was trying to
Mhm,
cheat.
mhm.
And that's what it was. And I want to call it cheating because it is cheating. When you go and you do simulation like that, um, you absolutely need to make sure that, you keep your head. And I think Gabriel did a really good job. I'm not having this kind of BS. When you look at Gabriel's game, he had such a good game in duels. He was so, so good. And he wasn't emotional like people keep saying. And there's a lot of narrative on the timeline that he's just far too emotional. Even Rio Ferdinand made a comment about it, and it was just absolutely ridiculous because he takes charge of the situation there. And
Mhm.
for me, it really pissed me off because all half Bamford was trying to isolate him and he got him nothing. And this was just a that, by the way, that Bamford foul, which we'll talk about really soon because we do have to wrap up, but it was frustration on Bamford's part. He was getting nothing throughout the game, despite people saying that Leeds had really good territory. You know, I think it was only because of our mistakes, and it really leads
Yeah,
into the next
I
bit of
I
play,
think
which is I think in the 50th minute before you go, Curran, because it's a
mm,
mistake by William Saliba. So right after that, in the 52nd minute, we fire a ball off to Thomas Partey, and we're looking to build. And I think this is part when Ellen Road got to William Saliba, he lost composure. Our back line really lost it. Not just were we passengers in a sense of not meeting our markers, but William Saliba has a very loose first touch, and he basically gifts the ball off to Bamford, who has a 1v1. And of course, Aaron Ramsdale at this position, it's a phenomenal save. Aaron Ramsdale recently has been criticized for his shot stopping. I hope that shuts people up, that performance, because it wasn't just one or two, but in this instance, look, he uses his balls by any anatomy possible. And but 1v1 in a situation like this, Patrick Bamford should be scoring. Patrick Bamford should be finishing this. It's ridiculous that he doesn't. But Aaron Ramsdale does phenomenal to make himself big. He closes the angle really, really tightly and quick. He focuses and makes himself really big at the right moment. He doesn't rush. He doesn't hurry his decision. And at that point, and look, Aaron Ramsdale deserves massive credit because again, I feel that he gets unnecessary criticism for being a poor shot stopper and just a great builder, very Ederson like. And I don't agree with that sentiment at all. I think there's times where he struggled near post. He's not perfect. He definitely has weaknesses. But to say that he's a poor shot stopper is something I'm not comfortable with, especially when you look at his metrics with Bournemouth and Sheffield, because they weren't poor. And he has this in his locker, and he saved us this game. This was an Aaron Ramsdale for me, clear man of the match, but this is somebody that won us the game. Thoughts?
yeah, so, um, before we get into the Rams specifically, because I think we do have to close up soon, I wanna talk some general principles of this second half because, um, we'll just go through the incidents after this. So, for me, the main thing for me was the lack of concentration due to fatigue. I think we were mentally and emotionally fatigued through the last 10 days. I think it got to us the atmosphere, as you mentioned several times this stream. The atmosphere at Ellen Road got to a couple of players, the Salibas, Gabriels, etc. I think Ben White majorly so. Um, I think we lacked security in our fullbacks. I think they were very good pressing out wide. They usually love that central compact press, but as you've mentioned in that scheme, they pushed their wingers high and wide, and that meant that they could press a bit wider and take advantage of some poor technical security at times from our fullbacks. Um, and this led to them turning over the ball a lot. And if you look at the field tilt, which we have here, which we'll get into at the end of the stream, screw it, I'll bring it up now. You can see that you have the ability to really look at it and see. Look, they kept it in a half. They
Mm,
kept it in a half because they were able to turn over the ball high, and they turned the ball over high because their press was wide, and it was press was not only wide, but they also pressured the centre backs well. They tried to basically keep it as wide and high as possible. And that's how they were able to turn over the ball. And as you mentioned before, Scott Parker did this well with Bournemouth. I think their press structure was very good. I think going man for man in a four against our four worked very well. And then we get into Ramsdale. Ramsdale has this ability to sense. I don't know if you've noticed it. If you look at Leicester away, if you look at specific performances where when he knows that we're in the shit, he seems to relish it. I think like a mentally, like it forms like some kind of switch in him.
him and
And
him and Gabrielle, when this team falters, they both step up consistently.
yeah, like
And if you look at
he has that mentality to really step up in key moments when the team really needs him. He was so good in terms of getting not only the shot stopping, but his ability to claim not only crosses but one-on-ones. um it wasn't just that he was immense with like his hands or whatever. He was immense in meeting his man. When Banford would get through, or Sinistero, whoever would get through, his ability to be quick, decisive, and not just be quick and decisive and do nothing, be quick and decisive and make an action commit to it. If he was going to go out, he committed. He's not sort of like in and then out, then in and out. He was
And
committed
he
to his
has
role.
struggled with that decision making. I think he's really quick off his line, and he's really good at
Mhm.
making himself big when he does make the correct decision to do so, but I think he has
But this
struggled with.
game, he was very decisive, and this is
Yes.
what I was proud of him for because he was very, very decisive in his actions, and he wasn't sort of half-assing. I think the scenario of the game and the game state and the way the emotion of the game had got to him, it meant that he was able to really push the tempo in terms of what his own actions were. Um, Look, I think the main thing we need to talk about though is the actual talking points of the game though. Um,
The
so
penalty, let's just
penalty
get into
first.
it
Let's get in the
because
penalty.
I think this is really clear, and I'm really tired of people saying that we didn't do well or we didn't deserve this, and that the refs that there's any kind of controversy. Guys, this is a very clear offside. I don't know why people are ignoring it, but in the build-up, Leeds have a very clear offside out wide, and I believe it's Jack Harrison who's out there, and he's
Yep.
clearly affecting play. Like there's no way that VAR can look at this and say that it isn't offside. So I'm really understanding why nobody looked at this. To be honest with you, VAR's there. No one made a mention of it. But immediately when I saw the build up to the action, I was saying this is offside by a clear margin. And then look, of course, when you kind of progress play after this, we kind of actually do well to stop this. And then they recycle the ball out wide, and of course, Bamford does a really bad miss here. And
You know what? I think Ramsdale would have saved it even if it was on target. He spreads himself so well. He springs properly
Yeah,
because
he
he
was
goes low.
excellent. He has an excellent spring. I've talked about Aaron Ramsdale's ability to kind of meet away from his line, and he does really, really well here. But I think he guesses excellently, and look, it just caps off a brilliant performance by Aaron Ramsdale um, once again. But that handball by Saliba, which it was, I just don't understand why people don't look back at this and call it offside. But like for you, current mate, like I think it's really self-explanatory. I think it's just referee incompetence here.
Yes.
But what did you make? You were just about to heap praise on Aaron Ramsdale, so I won't stop that. Go ahead.
No, I mean, look, it was offside. I listened to Dermot Gallagher on I think it was Football Daily. I don't know what it was, and he was saying, "Oh, there's a different phase in play. You can't go back that far with it." And I was thinking, hang on a second. It was okay to go back when it was Odegaard putting through Martinelli, and that was a whole thing. You can go back for that. That's a major thing. But this is apparently not the same thing. Which actions? How far are we allowed to go back? There's no um, like maybe we should have like a timer on it that you can only go back so far. Like there's no legality to it in terms of
Part of the
a
issue, Clarence,
clear.
for me is it's in the phase of play. I can understand. Look,
Yes.
you go back to the Old Trafford with the Martinelli goal, going back on the
Yeah, that's what I
foul
was
on the
telling you.
build
That's what I was saying.
to Odegaard, sure. Like, okay, maybe if it's in the same phase of play for me, then that's something that you have to discuss. But if it isn't and you're going past 30, 40 yards to find an issue in the buildup, then yeah, that is where I draw the line personally. But look, when you have a look here, Jack Harrison makes a play and he affects the defensive line. If Jack Harrison doesn't make that run, by the way, Gabriel steps up and we don't really have this issue. And Bamford himself would be offside. So
Mhm.
for me, the entire issue is, look, Mark Roca, he pushes Saliba. It's unfortunate. I don't think it's intentional, but I think it's just a culmination of Saliba's earlier mistake in the half. By the way, with his first touch, then this, he was having a rough game, right? And look, your teammates will have this, but this is why you need your center back partners to step up, which is what Gabriel did, and he shut down every opportunity. And then there was, before we get into the infamous push, and then we'll wrap up here on final thoughts. But again, Aaron Ramsdale makes another save in the 88th minute. And it's phenomenal because Leeds were carving us open at this point, and we were just too tired. We weren't winning any balls here, and Saliba loses his man again here. Third mistake in the half, and Aaron Ramsdale bails him out, and this is what you need. You need your goalkeeper to do that when you're having a rough game. But what I didn't like was that William Saliba didn't get the criticism that Gabriel did. What was the irony was that people were fuming at the possibility of a Gabriel emotional error when William Saliba made three major mistakes. And I love the boy. I was former Saliba season. Like there's a lot of pros and cons we can discuss, but the narrative when Gabriel makes a mistake, that meme with Gordon Ramsay when he's talking to children versus Hell's Kitchen, and he's
Yeah.
like, when you make a mistake, he's like, "Oh my
Yeah. Yeah.
dear." this is completely the case with the Arsenal fan base right now between William Saliba and Gabriel, and neither of them deserve abuse, but we have to have it right. William Saliba, excellent first half, really struggled in the second half. He was one of the
Yeah,
worst
very much
performers
so.
in the second half. Martin Odegaard, tough, he got subbed, but in general, our fullbacks really, really struggled. But after this, mate, we'll get into the incident because it's basically the last part of the half. 90th minute or 91st minute, something like that. And we've got 6 minutes left, and um, everybody is pissed. They think Gabriel has done it again. He's become emotional. Um, but I don't understand why there's even any controversy made. Like it's not, it's just clear that Bamford's pissed off. He gets petulant. He hasn't won anything against Gabriel all half. He's been pissed off because he's been second best to every duel. Gabriel has shut him down. He's retaliated. He's just barged into the back of Gabriel. By the way, turning his back, pussy move. Like I hate strikers that do this and they act the big man and then they go and he has the audacity to then dive. He doesn't touch him. It doesn't touch him at all. And he does all the theatrics about coming down and then springs back up. And people are willing to accept this. It's just the classic Harry Kane bullshit that I hate this idea that now we've accepted that, when you have contact, you go down and it's okay for the attacker to buy a penalty. No, can we please do what to the justice that it's called? Call a spade a spade. It's cheating. What Patrick Bamford did, basically all half, by the way, because at the beginning of the half, he said that he only touched it with his chest, and it was clear that it touched his arm. That was the only reason it came
Mhm.
back. And it was exactly like Ruud van Nistelrooy. I was absolutely livid. I think Patrick Bamford deserves shame. I saw none of that on the timeline. I saw no Leeds fans hang their head in shame. Why the hell are you sitting there defending somebody that's being petulant like that, trying to get somebody sent off? It's horrible. It's bad to the integrity of the game. And Patrick Bamford, you should hang your head in shame, you absolute pussy. I'm sorry. I don't agree with somebody that's going to go and sit there and be physical and then try to get their fellow teammate sent off. Nobody likes that. If you want to get
No,
sent off for a very poor action, no problem. But don't go sit there trying to make it seem like somebody did something that they didn't. And the linesman should be fired on the spot. That offside call is by his side, and then the linesman is the one that calls the red card. It's not even the ref. It's not even Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh doesn't
no.
want to give a ref. It's completely the linesman being an absolute retard trying to say, "Oh, he kicked out. He did this. He did
Don't say
that."
that on YouTube, man.
No,
What
no,
are
no,
you
no.
doing?
I'm gonna say it in the version of Curran who didn't give rest in peace to the Queen. It's absolutely ridiculous. It is pathetic. Okay, and retards where you draw the line, eh? But no,
Yes.
it, the linesman deserves a serious talking to. I don't understand why he gets away with it, and fundamentally, I don't know why there's controversy. I really don't. I really don't. Sorry, rant over. It really pissed me off because I just saw flashbacks to Ruud van Nistelrooy, and I'm definitely a guy
Yes.
like Lauren that I would have pushed somebody in that situation because you're cheating. That's what you're doing. Like
Uh,
you're cheating. That's what
I
you're.
talked to some Leeds fans. I talked to some of them in, I actually DM'd a couple because there's a couple that were being cool about it, there were a couple not being so cool about it. So I had a couple of conversations last night, and
Mm.
every single one of them brought up Jesus versus Thiago. Oh, but Jesus, there was not enough contact for Jesus to go down, but yet you want to have
He goes
contact
through
for
the back.
Bamford. So again?
He go Jesus got Tiago goes to the back of Jesus's leg.
Exactly.
I don't even think it's
Exactly.
terrible.
Like, this is the thing. I feel like as football fans, we're so tribalistic. We just want to bring up anything to justify our own. Instead of admitting mistakes, like it was a mistake of a penalty. It shouldn't have been a penalty, and it shouldn't have been a red. Um, Jesus on Thiago, you can talk about how little contact there was, but the guy goes to the back of his leg, and he makes contact, and there's an obvious basically clip of the back of the leg. It's obvious. So I just feel like there's a real shift in narrative over, oh, look, Arsenal getting all the decisions. We have some of the worst VAR decisions in the league. If you look at it,
You know what? But
um,
to be fair, Karen, like I've talked about this in the past, you've got to earn the right to become a big team again. And
yeah,
some of the call look, there is instances where it goes both ways. But I wouldn't say Arsenal, out of all the teams, have had the favorable decisions of the last 3 to 4 years.
no,
Big teams do get bigger calls. Like that
correct.
generally is correct throughout all of EPL history. Like bigger teams will get a bias towards that. but you have to earn your authority in those matches. But this isn't one of those cases. Like, I don't understand how you can say that you've won a call when it's such clearly a foul. It's so clearly somebody trying to get sent off. And I've seen no content creators out there worth their salt say what Patrick Bamford did is ridiculous. You shouldn't be trying to get your teammates and other people sent off that way. I have no problem if there in fact is contact and someone's petulant and he kicks out. I saw people essentially go and scream at Gabriel for reacting that way. I guarantee you, if you get pushed on the football pitch, by the way, that he was getting pushed all game. Bamford did this in the 52nd minute and then claimed that he hit it off his chest when it was a handball. And he was pushing Gabriel the entire game. So, no,
Mhm.
I think people, there's a thing in hockey that is essentially basically a call for instigating. You go to the penalty box for instigating. And this idea that people are just looking black and white at actions without understanding the lead up to that action is absolutely ridiculous. And if
But that
the
it
sport is
forget
highly,
penalties. Forget penalties, that is the problem of football analysis in general. There's
yeah,
no ability to look 2 actions before to see why someone's in that position, why someone like, I see a lot of, if you remember the North London derby, this is the last point, we'll get into final thoughts after this. Um, if you look at the North London derby and the people criticizing Gabriel for the goal, right? Um, and you look at the actual actions beforehand, but why is Gabriel one-on-one there?
mm,
Why is that a situation when, in fact, the left hand, your fullback isn't tracking back in time, and you're leaving Xhaka and Gabriel 3-on-2? Like, it's not something you need to look before the action to see why it's going to happen, um, especially in defensive transition situations, because this happened with Man United away when Martinelli doesn't cover the central space. This happened with Tottenham when Zinchenko doesn't run back in transition in time. So look, there's a lot of yeah, this is a good way. Yeah, fine, it's fine. But before we get into final thoughts, and remember, let's just answer this. Do you think there's any justification to this question, or not really?
not really for me because a lot of the damage came from Spurs and Liverpool. Like, tactically, if you
Mhm.
go back, we gave so much in those games that, even if he didn't play in the Bodo game, he still would have traveled. And so, the effect of
Yeah,
the travel is really the issue, and then not being able to have a training session afterwards. Look, it's gonna happen with us playing Thursday, Sunday, but we had intense games and, like, not just normally intense games, but probably the most intense that you're gonna have, a North London derby followed by Liverpool and then Leeds, who are the next best pressing scheme in the
yeah.
league. Like, I don't think it gets much more intense. If on paper you could pick opposition to do intensity and who was the most intense, you're going to pick a North London derby. You're going to pick Liverpool as one of the more intense games, and Leeds are going to be one of the more intense teams. So it's just unfortunately a consequence of our circumstance. So and then we move on to Southampton, which we'll get into a little bit later. But look, for me, final thoughts, and I'll get yours, Corin.
Mm.
Look, a lot of this is for me fatigue. I think this is the big reason. One thing that obviously we struggled with was our fullback performances, and Tomiyasu and Ben White, I think, were poor from the off. They weren't able to fire in and beat that 4-2-4 press as well. But once we did, we were able to carve teams open, and we showed it kind
Mhm.
of earlier with the screenshots. So for me, I'm not worried in our ability to beat this. It's not like we struggled against the press; we just struggled doing the basics. So we just have to recover. And at this point, we have to be able to field a team that we think can take us to the next level in terms of adding some more depth and adding ability to kind of have this sustained press throughout. I do think having 4 games in 10 days is something, even if you had a complete squad depth, is something that you're going to struggle with. And, one thing I will say is when you go into the Champions League next year, cough,
This is
cough,
gonna happen.
this is going to happen, and people aren't going to be, playing a lot. A lot of the reasons that I think Mikel Arteta is forcing teams to play again and players to play again is because you're going to have to do that in the Champions League, and you don't rotate like you do in the Europa League. Like, that's just not something that you do. In these top teams, they have to play every 3 days at points. So for me, unfortunately, it's just a consequence of the circumstance. But I was happy with the reaction of the boys. And if you are going to struggle like that, don't give anything physically. Dominate your duels, and that's how you're going to get out of making your own luck, essentially, which is what we did. So I don't want to see this going forward. If it's a pattern, then no problem. But one thing I want to remind everybody of is this is literally the first 45 minutes of the season that Arsenal have been second best. So That is the definition of an outlier, by the way. For me, I'm not going to get too worried. But I was impressed with Jesse Marsh. I do think he deserves his credit. Something I don't think we've given enough on this review, but I will give
Yeah,
it now. I think Jesse Marsh is an incredible coach. I think he's going to do a lot of really good things. And the only reason he's languishing in 14th is because he hasn't been able
15th.
to field, or 15th. Sorry. The only reason he's so low is because he hasn't been able to field a front line. They've been injured for so long. So, um, I think we'll talk about Sambi maybe a little bit later. But
We'll talk
here,
about it on the Europa preview. We'll talk about it
yeah,
on the Europa preview.
we'll talk about it on the Europa preview because we did warn here on BoP. For us, well, for me, I never felt that he was a starting potential player. He was always somebody that was a squad depth kind of guy. But I think we'll talk a little bit more on him. But yeah, no, Southampton next. But Curran, final thoughts for you, mate, in terms of a very ugly win. But hey, we go 27 out of 30, 9 out of 10 points. That's worth reminding everybody. Or sorry, not points, but wins. Our best start to the season. Do you just got to take those at times when you play
No,
poorly?
I
Just
love it, man. Screw it. I love it. Screw it. No. This is
yeah,
I love it. Like screw the sustainability, all that bullshit. Sometimes a gritty 1-0 where you really shouldn't be getting out of there with 3 points. Instead, you should be really settling for a draw and be happy with it. I love those wins. I love that. Give me
mm,
more of that. I need
yeah,
that. I like it's simple. Like I need to be able to say, look, can we this young team survive mentally when it's pressed, when the chips are down, and can you rise to the occasion? And this is one of those games where you're like, holy crap, they rose to the occasion. They understood what the assignment was and how they needed to win this game. I will say that if we had Zinchenko, I think we control this game a little bit better. I think missing them was a key metric in this performance. I think, especially having the ability to bring Mo on later on, I think would have been great. As well as having the technical security of Zinchenko on the left, I think would have helped a lot. But this shows that we have the depth now. We're not struggling at left back. We're not struggling to understand how we can get through games. I think we need to move on from this. And I think Southampton, in terms of Premier League, I think that's a good game to go to next. I think they also have a very young team that has quality in certain areas, but lacks the threat up top. There's no bite there. I like Che Adams, but he's not there. We'll get into that game for the preview. But the thing is, let's have a look and see where this team can go.
yeah. But actually,
I,
just
I'm yeah.
further to this point, just really quickly, there's been
Mhm.
5 previous sides that have this, and the only one that didn't make the title was actually a 42 game season. And the other previous 4, of course, went on to win the title. So you can't knock the start of the season. And
Mhm.
really, if only one of your games is, and not even that, one of your halves. I'm not having the game because the first half we were the better team. We were better
Mhm.
than Leeds. We showed that, and so we were deserved the goal. But if you're gonna have one half where you're poor, then I'll take that. I mean, that happens. So
Yeah, it's not like we completely um we had players relinquishing responsibility, not showing out for balls. I think we were just mentally and emotionally tired. I think you could
yeah,
tell that these 10 days have taken a lot out of these players. But it's not like we were having players like shirk their responsibility, evacuating their zones, looking to basically hide in the game. I think that was not the case at all, and that's why I want. As long as players are not evacuating zones and relinquishing responsibility from their roles, then we're okay because a bad performance can happen. But you still manage the 3 points. The principles did not change. We didn't just collapse. We didn't look to basically uh, bring on having to bring on players because players were just being irresponsible on the ball or not pressing well or not doing their roles at a specific level. We had players that wanted to do it, they just weren't at the level today, and that's the main thing. We'll get on to PSV, Olivier. Don't worry about it. We'll get into it tomorrow, I think. Um, which at some point we'll get into it, but I think this is a good point to close. I would like to say before I let George do his thing, um, look, this team, I don't know about titles. I don't know about Europa Leagues. This is not the time for me yet. I think 10 games we mentioned last season. I remember shouting. let's see where we are after 10 games, after the first 3 games, and seeing, look, that's a good sample size to see because we lost the first 3 games. And look at 10 games and look at where we are. Look at that kind of when the table starts to take shape. And the table is looking good for us right now. But I have some data that I'm going to release later on today or maybe tomorrow. Um, we've faced a average opposition of 10 point, I think 10.9. I'll have a quick check yeah, 10 point. The position we faced is on average 10.9, which is obviously a little bit better, a little bit lower than average. So we've had about an average start to the season in terms of difficulty of opponent. We faced 3 Big 6 teams. Not a lot of teams have faced. No one's faced more than that. We've had a lot of teams face 3 Big 6 teams, and we have come through tests. And this is a good team. We don't know how far it can go, but we are sitting on top of the table, and let's see what we can do. So I think top 4 has to be obviously the baseline, and then let's see where we can go from there. But yeah,
No, absolutely. And you know what? I think one thing I will say, as I said at the beginning of the season, our form, but rather our output, will determine our top four between now and the start of Christmas. And we need to maximize points if we're going to guarantee that. Now, if we're going to do anything more and anything special, that conversation for me doesn't start till March. I don't care what you have. For me, you have to be in a title challenge when you're within 5 points by March, because then you still have another 10 games to go. And that's when you can overturn. I've seen Arsenal overturn 7 point gaps with Spurs in less games. So, anyways, that's for more Spurs hate, follow this channel. No, I think on the title talk, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. I think I'm just focused on the next game and basically getting out of the next 4 or 5 games with maximum points, because
gets the
that's
World Cup.
for top four. And yeah, let's go to the World Cup. I think the World Cup bookmarks seasons really, really quite well. So, guys, thank you so much for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed the kind of analysis here. I know it was probably difficult to watch at some points because it's not our best game, but I think going forward, the only thing that I'm looking at right now is making sure that we're going to maximize points, and we're going to the next one. So we have PSV next. We will be with you guys for a preview tomorrow of that PSV game. Look at Cody Gakpo as well as Xavi Simmons, a really exciting prospect from
Yeah,
PSG. But guys, thank you so much for sticking with us. We're going to catch you guys tomorrow for the preview. Hope you guys have a good night, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. So peace, everybody.
peace.